All right. So the first question we have is, who do Marika and Radagon have kids?
Who can
Oh, who
Marika
can
and
Marika
Radagon
and
have
Radagon
kids?
have kids? Perfect.
Who can Marika and Radagon have kids? Can you tell me this, Al?
I'm sorry. This is beyond even me.
Hopefully someday, through a dialogical process, we can answer the question.
Dude, that's tough. If we find that out, we may find out everything else.
The key.
Who can? Oh my god. Welcome back, everyone. This is our more relaxed kind of chiller stream that we're gonna do in regards to some Bloodborne things. So that's why we started off with that question. I'm your host on the left, Owl.
I'm your host on the right, Brock.
And today we're gonna be talking about the quote deep end quote story of Elden Ring and some of the things people are kind of overlooking in their analysis of some of the Souls games.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. There's an aggressive dismissal of the idea that a game like Elden Ring could have a specific meaning you could interpret from it. And some people are calling it meaningless because it's too hard to understand. And so I don't think that it's impossible to come to understand it. And I think there's evidence that people know how to approach it. It's just I think that dismissiveness just needs a response, right?
Right, and I think too because we were originally going to name this something cosmic because it was about people missing the cosmic meaning behind the things in the game, which is kind of still holds true. We decided to change the title, but that's really where we're getting at, and so we'll see more of that towards the end. It's gonna hopefully end on a little bit of a white pill. We're not just saying everything. There's no analysis. Everything is bad.
Yeah, that's really not the point of what we're doing. I think it's really just to point out how best to use our attention to figure out these games.
Yes.
Avoiding the pitfalls.
How to have the insight to see.
Yeah.
There you go. All right, so let's go ahead and start with our first video, which we're obviously not going to watch the whole thing, but this is our first video here. It's called Elden Ring is Disappointing. And I think a lot of these videos are pretty recent, so this is a good time to respond to them, I would say. And also, we appreciate the attention our last video on SoulsBorne got. Hopefully, you guys continue to enjoy our content. We've updated our link, so if you want to join our Discord, it's there. Our YouTube no longer links to that ad on Amazon, and our Twitter has always stayed the same. So let's go ahead and get into our first video.
Yeah.
This is part 4, The Deep Story. We're going to play a little bit.
The Fallen Leaves tell a story, but I'm not convinced it's a good one.
Might want to
I have
slow it
completed Elden
down,
Ring 2 times.
actually.
I have watched a reasonable...
Time to slow it down, actually.
Maybe just a little bit.
We were listening to it at that speed. I'm also going to turn it down a bit.
amount of lore videos, and I have spent a considerable amount of time reflecting on the information presented within this game. One thing I haven't found yet is any reason the player is meant to care about.
So any reason the player is meant to care. Do we want to tackle that? It's hard to say, like, there's no reason for you to care in a lot of these. Like, why do you care in Bloodborne, right?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the meta narrative of why does the player care at all whenever they're playing a Souls game specifically.
Yeah.
Because
well, he's talking about diegetic caring. Why does his character care? But that makes sense.
But it's the same in the Souls games, right? It is a resonance between this that ludonarrative resonance, right? Between the experience of the player and also the experience of the character. And we'll see it in a second as he's pointing out how the world seems meaningless. It's like the whole purpose of the themes of the game are pointing towards whether or not it's necessary to have some kind of strict order for the world so that there can be meaning. And it's like...
and to be someone who is going to fill that responsibility, I think that's
to create
a reason
meaning.
To care, right?
Yeah.
That's meaning itself. That is something to care about, right? That is something to pay attention to. But let's go ahead and continue.
About all this. Now, From Software have become famous for their confusing narratives, but I would like to compare the different openings of these games. In Demon Souls, you find yourself stuck in the kingdom of Boletaria, where demons are consuming the souls of humans to
I think
turn
we
them
can
into
skip this
monsters.
part, actually.
Humanity is facing an existential threat.
Yeah, this is just a bog standard. Here's what happened at the beginning of each game.
Which we all know. You guys know.
What was I saying?
Talking about how this was just like a here's what happened in the early games.
Oh, yeah. It's basically to give a rundown of how each of these games gives you a really good sense of purpose and what you're supposed to do, but Elden Ring isn't specifically giving your player character a reason to care.
Kind of does. I kind of just disagree with that entirely, but let's continue.
To protect him. In Elden Ring, you are a Tarnished who wakes up in the Lands Between and then sets out to kill every important person here to try to become the Elden Lord. But this is not your war, so why would I want to get involved in it? And this is not your land, so why would I want to rule it?
This is an issue here, for a couple of reasons. If anyone out there is a Diablo fan, they'll know that in the first game, the character that you play, no matter who it is, whether it's the sorcerer, the rogue, or the warrior, is returning to town, and that's the first thing the bartender says, or the innkeeper says to them is, "Thank goodness you've returned." There is something mythological about the return home, the Odyssey home, let's say,
Right.
to set back in order what was once in order. But I think that's something
That's
is kind
part
of
of it.
missed here, because
So
the Tarnished themselves are a whole race of people or not race, but the whole
yeah,
kind of a whole race
yeah.
of people that are basically that embodiment, right?
So what I want to point out about that too is think of Moses, right? As a baby going down the river and then being picked up by a surrogate mother and then having to be the champion of a people that aren't his people, you know.
Mhm.
Being put into this situation where he's of dubious birthright, right? And that's what you are, in a sense, crossing the fog and coming back, sort of as a representative of a line, of a genealogy, is that you are sort of a chosen people, called for a duty to order itself. And so you have the
Right,
guidance
and
of
that's
grace.
the thing. Also, you're it's kind of the Tarnished are kind of I don't want to say the best of them, but like it is almost like a chosen people kind of thing.
In the same sense that in Dark Souls, for instance, there's the chosen hollow. You necessarily have to be a hollow to be a chosen undead, right? Or not necessarily a hollow, but an undead in the first place because of the myth of the undead. And so you have to be a Tarnished in that same sense, which is like cast out of the world to return back into it. And that's the asylum, right?
And it's to say that the order, let's say nourishing factor that replenishes the world doesn't come from within, right? It comes from without.
Right. But specifically sort of the cast out of the material world into the desert, let's say, or into purgatory, whatever it is, and then back into the world, returned back from that to then enact a pattern of being higher than yourself, like following the guidance of grace, let's say, in the world. It's a strong mythological motif, and I think that's the role that you're playing. And this is similar to other myths as well, but we don't have to go down that whole road. I mean, it plays out like a Celtic myth as well, but that's ultimately, I think, what's going on there, right? Is it has to be a return from nothing. It's like you have the participation in a principality of creating order in the world, an exile, and then something like the archetypal desert story,
Well,
right?
and then we
An
should,
exodus.
We need to talk about Horaloo, right?
Yeah.
In that case.
And the
because-
Badlands being sort
Yeah.
of the desert.
Yeah, definitely. And so Horaloo is the one that really enacted the order that Marika willed to be, right? He's the one that led the armies and conquered the lands between and unified everyone under the Erd Tree, right?
Yes.
And so he's the one that's banished. It's significant to say he's the one that's banished, right? It's not like, oh, just the omens weren't banished, let's say. It just wasn't those who were like not given grace, and here the tarnished are re-given grace, let's say. And so they have to return and to set things right. It was always part of the plan, more or less.
Right, and there's a certain type of wisdom that's gained in the desert, and it specifically spells it out in the Bible in Exodus, where it shows the methodology by which the people find meaning and find rules for civilization in this sort of how'd you say, it's like a microcosm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so creating meaning out of that desert is thematically what your character is archetypally doing. Like you come
That's why
back
you start
from the
as
desert.
like a hero, or you start as like a full warrior. You're not leveled up, obviously, but then that goes into the whole idea of New Game Plus, which I've always thought is kind of the real. Well, it depends on the game. Because in Demon Souls, for example, it wouldn't make sense for you to come to Boletaria already being able to level up.
Right, but then
But in
also
others-
consider Bloodborne, how
Yeah.
you're an outsider who's come here for
Yeah.
blood ministration, which is to gain that which animates you from the environment which you've come into, that you have to imbibe it into your body, right? And that's kind of what it is. It's the old blood that goes into you, and then you become a part of this cosmic picture that is Yharnam. And that's what you do here. You become integrated into a bigger cosmic story here, but you're originally an outsider coming into the lands between
Mm.
to be that sort of blank slate.
Right. They can.
Because bloodlines matter in this game as well,
Yes.
as we see, right? And that has to do with the omens. And
But as
everything.
being a tarnished, aren't you like you're descended of Horaloo, right?
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
Which is sort of the fist of unity
Uh-huh.
that he can create. It's very similar. It reminds me. I mean, we see this even in like Game of Thrones with Mance Rayder, right?
Mm-hmm,
Where you have that past the wall, past civilization, unifying force in the desert or in the Arctic wasteland, right? That unifies the chaos all under a more primordial rule.
Mm-hmm.
And he can point that out, and so that can create order out of all sorts of chaos.
And we know all we're not going to get in anymore. I'll go ahead
Yeah.
and play some video. But
All of that.
there's more to
say
talk
that-
about Horaloo.
That you're doing that too, right?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, it doesn't seem like a very nice place. Everyone just tries to kill each other. There is a religious aspect to these events where you were apparently once banished by the light of grace, and now it is welcoming you back and trying to guide you. And it is nice that the light of grace wants me back after banishing me, but why would I want it back? It banished me, and as far as I can tell, I don't owe it anything.
What do you think about that? I don't know what anything.
Well, the game has something to say about that, because that's what this game's about. Do you owe it anything? There is a character in this game that's all about getting rid of the idea that you owe it anything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's weird that it's like I don't have any motivation to engage with the story, because here's a question I have. When the game is philosophically trying to answer that question for you if you would just engage with the world.
Right, and it is that choice that you're coming down to. I'm not actually sure of all the endings yet in Elden Ring, so I'm not gonna ask about them either. I think you do.
I know a bit.
Okay.
I know all of the endings. And I've seen the translated ones as well.
And so this is to say that spurning the order that existed before is it's a pretty bloatheady way of looking at it. It's
Yeah, it's like it's to say
counter.
I got unlucky in the world, therefore I'm going to be resentful towards
Yes.
fortune itself.
It's the opposite of Job, let's say.
Yeah.
Right. This is if Job would be like, well, since you didn't protect me, God, now I don't like you. Now you don't exist.
And then the devil would win.
Yes. And so you can see the devil has won against poor man who I don't remember his name.
Elden Ring is disappointing, man.
That is his name.
In fact, I don't even know what it is. Maybe we are stuck in the lands between, but other people do seem to travel between here and other places, like the Badlands and the Land of Reeds, so wouldn't a more sensible motivation be to look for a way off this rather dangerous island?
Yeah, but I mean, then you wouldn't have the game. You're undertaking the task because the game and engaging with the world is going to create the answer to that question for you. Saying that why don't I just leave because it's like dangerous here, right? which is actually something kind of addressed in the other games. But in this one, it's not so apparent that the Tarnished wants to leave. Like let's say in Bloodborne, when you're the hunter in Bloodborne, you can't leave because you're trapped by the hunter's dream, right?
Right.
In Dark Souls, you could conceivably leave if you had somewhere to go, but you're in Lordran, right? Dark Souls 2, kind of the same thing. Why would you want to? But here, I think
I don't understand why that's a significant argument. The same thing happens at the beginning of Dark Souls 3. You're called forth for a purpose as the chosen undead, like before, only now you're called, essentially an ashen hollow or whatever. But yeah, you're essentially the ashen one.
Yeah, ashen one.
And there's literally like a fire that's been lit for you in the same way that you've got the guiding grace in this. So it's like, okay, well, why aren't we really saying the same thing about Dark Souls 3? Like, what responsibility do I have to create order out of this chaos? It's like, in what world would you conceptualize not doing that?
In fact, I mean, if you really want to go further with it, if you're like, oh, I really don't like the order of this place, everyone's mean, why don't you just put the game down? Then you've enacted the end philosophy that you are espousing, right? By doing that. And so I also don't understand this criticism.
Instead, we just set off immediately to kill everyone.
Is that what you did? Did you kill the
Well, I didn't kill Vare.
girl that's like down Vare? You killed Vare?
No.
You killed the merchant Kale. You just killed him, right? Right when you saw him.
Oh yeah. That's what you do, right?
Yeah, I
forgot.
killed
No,
every
I
single. I
The
killed
people, yeah, I killed them all.
Yes, exactly. Finger crones, kill him. The War Master killed him easy.
Easily, yes.
Easily. So, anyways, I don't think this is a very good it's very reductive because you don't kill everyone. In fact, there's plenty of NPCs in this that you don't kill. And he shows this too, which is hilarious because you actually don't kill this character.
It's true.
At this point. Or ever?
You do.
See? Well, remember...
He vanishes whenever he's held up by...
Oh, there you go. Okay.
But
I was trying to remember that, yeah.
This isn't completely insane because killing people does make you stronger, but it's still very psychopathic. Imagine if you woke up on a
I think
strange...
that's psychopathic to say that. Like, if your only motivating factor is killing them makes you stronger.
That is psychopathic, but if your motivation is to kill them to set order back in the world, I don't know if that's so psychopathic.
Like, obviously, with it being a mechanic of the game making you stronger, you'll do it to become stronger. But that doesn't mean that the ludonarrative reason that you're doing it is essentially just because you want to see numbers go up. That's so reductive.
Well, it's very reductive.
Island one day. Maybe your plane crashed, and you find this island has some problems. There's even a war going on. Would you then jump straight into action to kill everyone?
Just to kill everyone again.
That is not even what happens. He says, imagine you go to an island, your plane crashes there. No. Imagine you leave your home for years, and you come back, and everything's gone to shit. Would you just let it continue? Or would you just leave?
Do you feel any responsibility for that which gave you form?
Exactly. And so it's a really bad analogy.
And try to become the new island ruler. Because I know I wouldn't.
Just to try to become the ruler.
That's what you do, right?
Well, there's this thing, though, where Gideon Ofnir says, specifically, repeatedly, stand before the Elden Ring and become Elden Lord if you know what this means. Specifically, if you know what this means, then you know your answer, essentially. And what he's getting at there is that there is a certain amount of wisdom you have to understand what it means to be Elden Lord and not just knowledge. Right?
Just a ruler.
So the wisdom that you need to be able to be Elden Lord is something that goes beyond just doing it to be to have the most power, right? It's about creating harmonies and finding balance in duality, right? It's not just about being at the top of the hierarchy.
Exactly. This is not the a tournament.
Yes.
It does my character. Every important NPC we end up killing has done nothing to us.
Can we start listing off everything that this guy on screen
This
did?
one guy right here, right?
The
So-
sins against nature itself.
Yeah, and I mean, look at all the arms there.
The
The sword of
experimenting that he
blasphemy,
did
yep.
on the Albinarics.
Kidnappings in Raya Lucaria.
Boiling people above lava in cages.
I mean, I guess he's gonna say like that didn't happen to the.
He actually
Tarnished.
hunted the religious. He specifically tried to blaspheme against God by killing religious people in horrifying ways
Mhm.
as a spite against essentially this conceptualization of God.
And these are the rebels, right? He's the leader of the rebels, let's say.
Yeah.
Here. But I guess what would you say to that it doesn't happen to the tarnished? None of that happens to the tarnished.
I still think that's just
But like this is
not
the guy
heroic.
that kind of messed up your home, right? Kind of messed a lot of the things up.
yeah,
that we
he
see.
he helped conspire to break the order.
Yeah, and so like the biggest battle is fought at Mount Gelmir, and that's like where most everyone like died, or let's say it's the biggest battle of the Shattering, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we listed all his crimes already, and yeah, I mean it's something you don't even have to kill this boss, by the way. So I don't even know why he's saying that. We just have to kill. Why would you show him? Of all people, why would you show him? Let's just continue.
Some of them don't seem very nice. For one of them, it seems to be a mercy kill, but most of the time we just travel around looking for people to kill and steal power from.
Steal power from.
So in each of these instances, there's a dysfunction happening. Someone has lost their mind, they've lost their ability, their sense of self. So
Their humanity.
let's look at Renala here.
Mhm.
She has gone insane with grief, and she's just creating these abominations, essentially, with the egg that Radagon left her. And she's basically in a fugue state, or in a hypnosis, it seems. And she just keeps summoning more and more of this thing that it's like a creepy, how would you say, like malformed clone of a child over and over and over.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
so
and they
you
can't
come
walk like they. Yeah.
and you're like, what has happened to this? So for instance, what has happened to this academy? It is absolutely chaos.
Mm-hmm.
You finally get to the heart of it, and it's this. It seems like Renala has completely lost her mind with grief.
Well, remember she's imprisoned here, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm remembering that correct, is she imprisoned here?
Is she imprisoned? I can't remember if it's that.
Because we fight a Carrion Knight right outside of this, if I remember correctly. No, that's in the manor.
I think
Scratch
I think she's basically barricaded herself in and gone into seclusion at this point. And because that kind of ties into the deeper quest lines that I don't think you've done yet, specifically around the glintstones, because there's like two types of match.
A little bit.
Suffice to say that the leaders of glintstone sorcery were forced out by the Carrion family, including Renala.
Okay.
So that has to do with Selen's questline and everything, which we don't have to go into. But even then, what you're doing here is creating an order out of a chaotic situation, right? There seems to be some heart of disruption happening here.
Selen does take over because she's still comatose at the time. She like moves to another room, right? When Selen comes and conquers the academy.
She gets turned into one of the spheres.
Oh yes.
And then she's
That's
just,
the very
and she's losing her sense of self.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So,
But let's focus back on Renala. So Renala, we don't kill Renala first of all.
but we don't kill her, right?
Yeah.
We're in the world of the unconscious, standing on
Yes.
the lake in front of the moon, and what we fight is a projection animated by Ronnie, right? And so you go into sort of a higher realm, or the psychic world, and
Oh,
contend
wait.
with who she was.
She's carrying. That's why
Yeah.
she's locked up here.
Yeah.
Yeah, she is locked up. She is imprisoned in the library. I'm fairly certain of it. Go ahead.
But anyway, with her being in this state, what you're contending with is her inner self. Not unlike what happens with, let's say, Casca in Berserk, and they have to
Mhm.
go into the realm of her mind and sort of symbolically pull it back together.
Right.
And so that's what you're doing when you're fighting her, and that's why she's alive after you defeat her, and then she can actually, she's lucid now, right? She's not just floating there,
Making babies.
constantly just spawning
Yeah.
disorderly or dysfunctional clones, essentially.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So she became obsessed with the potential, right? And she, as a symbol of the feminine unconscious, continually became that which spawns, right? And just like focused on
It's
that.
creative force, right?
Because like she's been imprisoned there by the academy, and so and Radagon left her and all that, and she became grief stricken from that, and so that's kind of why she's so focused on, one, the thing that Radagon left her, and two, the potentiality of his return, of future children of his, all of that kind of thing that we see that gives Renala meaning and actually like makes her lucid again, right? Because what do you do with her whenever she is lucid again? You can become reborn.
Right. It's almost like a piece of reality. It's like she has this egg which represents creation itself, and you can be recreated through it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very alchemical, right? It is that golden seed sort of thing that she's got. That it's like a seed. That's the best way I could put it. A seed of creation.
Yeah. And I would say, like, yeah, it's a good reason why it's not just like, oh, we fight this person and kill them. That's it. They haven't done anything to us.
Now, in fairness, they do attack us,
Don't have to
but
fight
we're the
her
one
either.
trespassing into their domain and killing all their men, so we're starting it. The only reason we eventually get for all this is to repair the Elden Ring, but why would we want to do this? I mean, maybe repairing the Elden Ring is a good thing, but maybe it's not.
How can you not tell from the story?
It seems evident that a lot of these problems happened after the shattering of the Elden Ring.
Yeah. Well, the war broke out before or after the shattering?
I believe after, because the war was for the pieces.
Maybe. I need to revisit, because I thought it was America shattered it finally because they started to go to war with each other.
Because they started to, or because like
Yeah.
they had been at war?
Yeah. Maybe
I'm
I'm
not
wrong.
so sure.
Maybe I'm wrong. I can't remember where I heard that. That kind of ties into it, but clearly it is. Clearly it's not up necessarily for debate. I mean, look at the Flame of Frenzy ending, right? Which is another one that I do know. I don't think that's a good ending.
No, it clearly isn't the good ending. I mean, unless you want a world where everyone is screaming in agony constantly.
Well, as they all turn into Tang, basically.
Essentially.
Yeah. That's a reference to Neon Genesis Evangelion.
It's Evangelion.
And no one explains to us why it would be. Not all rings are good.
No one explains to us why it would be. Why the reinstantiation of order in the chaotic world of Elden Ring would be a good thing.
There is an entire religion of people obsessed with that fact.
Yeah.
There's Melina and everything she says to you, especially in response to you wanting to abandon it, for the Flame of Frenzy. It's explicitly spelled out what the Golden Order is about and what is worth preserving. Whenever Melina says there are still births, there's like disparity is still a good thing, right?
Yeah, there's beauty in that, I think she says, which
Yeah,
goes
she
into
says
the
beauty.
beauty of
And
it, which is
beauty,
a good way of putting it. The order of the Elden Ring is good, capital G good. It is beautiful, right?
yes.
Yeah.
There's a beauty in the nature of things, which is going to put a pin in that.
Put a pin in it.
Just ask Celebrimbor.
That was a reference to Lord of the Rings, but it doesn't make any sense in this point.
Now, if it sounds like I'm pedantically picking at unimportant details, then you are at least wrong about the last part. Because pedantic I might be, but these are not unimportant details, they are at the centre of the game's story. From Software have always withheld information and obscured details, but they've never tried to withhold and obscure everything, and Elden Ring is so committed to making everything as vague and confusing as possible that in the process it completely abandons the aspects that made previous games' narratives work.
I wonder if this particular creator had played Dark Souls and Demon Souls when they first came out, because it took a while for it to get there, and it was pretty dialectic. And I think Miyazaki taking it to those next levels of abstraction and symbolism is not necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not supposed to be easy to understand, first of all. Now, I don't want to be reductive in that response. What I'm saying is that a lot of what I'm hearing right now is it's never been this hard to understand.
Yes.
Saying that it's been more clear for me. It's told me specifically what I wanted to hear. And I feel like that's also just informed by what we already know about the games, though. Like, I don't know if you could say this if Dark Souls was still new and you didn't have the lore hounds for the next 6-7 years just breaking it down before there was a really concrete view of it.
Right. It's not, let's say, as a parent, but and maybe it is a fallacy of hindsight here, right?
Yeah.
Like having a strong central theme, or using
Okay, so let me play the next second.
obvious and easy to understand imagery and symbolism.
Is it? Because I'm not seeing that.
You're not seeing obvious to understand symbolism?
I find some of it obvious, but it isn't obvious to me that other people find it obvious because I don't hear much of it.
Let's play his full thing. Hold on.
Having a process, it completely abandons the aspects that made previous games' narratives work, like having a strong central theme, or using obvious and easy to understand imagery and symbolism.
I don't know. I mean, there are levels of analysis that we know, right? Having a tree and people saying, "Oh, it's like Yggdrasil," right? That's what people were saying before the game even came out.
Right.
And that's symbolic, though, like the idea of a world tree, right?
Mm-hmm. Or maybe the fact that
but here's what I'm gonna say. So like I understand what you're saying. Like it's not easy to understand, but surface level it is, right?
it is
Surface
though.
level you can see it. It is obvious. It is as I would say it is as obvious or more obvious than Dark Souls.
Actually, I mean we fundamentally disagree with this across the community because most people say that this is much easier to understand from a lore perspective than Dark Souls or Demon Souls or specifically Bloodborne because of how much information it does give you.
Gives you a lot.
I mean,
Turtle Pope gives you a lot.
there
too.
are characters now in the game who are just like, oh yeah, I'm just another inhabitant of this world and I'm just going to give you information about the lore. And they'll just sit there and talk to you and give you all kinds of info.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a really odd thing to say. And he says that Elden Ring lacks a strong central theme.
I mean, that's obviously wrong.
We're going to come up with a theme of Elden Ring video.
Yeah, we'll do
There's
that.
more than one. There's like 5 themes, I'd say. Maybe 6. But they're big. They're encompassing.
Yeah.
Or giving the player motivation for their journey, or ensuring the vagueness fits realistically with the setting. For example, in Dark Souls, there is a clear theme of struggle and finding your own way forward in spite of this, as well as death and facing an inevitable end.
How is the struggle part not in Elden Ring? Like that's such a vague thing to say. Struggling and eventually overcoming.
That's a part of every Souls game.
That's a part of like everything. that's worth doing. Let's say
That's
it's really strange that
it's
is one
embedded
that he says.
into the design of Elden Ring such that the first boss you come to, you're not supposed to be able to beat immediately, so that you have to struggle. Like, the struggle is part of the story always. So I don't see how it's a specifically Dark Souls thing where it's like, oh, the theme was obvious.
Yeah.
And then struggle. Like, the theme of Dark Souls is struggle?
Is it? Yeah, I know exactly.
Imagery and symbolism involve a dichotomy between light and dark, as well as the fading of a flame, and people going hollow, and all of these are easy to understand, even without playing the game, in a way that Elden Rings and Greater Wills are not.
It's funny he says greater will there. Like, it's not like the greater will is easy to understand. It's let's say motivations and things, but on a surface level, it's easy to understand what the greater will is supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
It's the cosmic force of the universe.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to say that it's not. I don't know why he uses this. It's such a bad argument.
Look, there is a pendant that has a picture of the two fingers on it, and it looks like it's got legs. And I think that's because it's supposed to look like a chromosome.
Chromosome, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because the greater will animates the fingers. And so the pattern of evolution and the development of the patterns of our bodies in a cosmic sense is the will of that guiding pattern. That, I say pattern.
Yeah, it's like the
Like
the
a
greater will,
spirit.
the order of the universe. Like natural selection would be involved with that,
Yes.
right? The movement of the celestial bodies, things like that. The way that celestial orbits are ellipses, that's all part of the greater will, the greater order, the cosmic strings.
And the studies into the greater will give mathematics in the world of Elden Ring, essentially, because that's how they find the logic of the world.
And that's actually how a lot of mathematics were derived in ancient times as well, by astrological study. So that's
Yeah.
interesting. I didn't know that about Elden Ring.
I mean, whenever you look at the key writings of causality and regression
Yeah.
and the inspiration towards that, I can't remember the exact name of the book, but there's a lot of Pythagorean sort of inspiration there, where it's whenever you see the angles drawn on all of the different things to do with the Golden Order.
Yeah. Definitely.
Anyway, I don't want to go way off on a tangent
Let's
on
not
that,
go
but
too
yeah.
far, but I think we're
The setting
probably
is one
about
where
done with
most
this
humans
video.
have already went hollow, so very few people are even left to explain things to the player, and when you do find someone who knows more than you, they do explain exactly what you should do, how you should do it, and why this is so important. Framt isn't
Does he doesn't even tell you what linking the fire is, though. He
They'll let
just
you make
said
link
how
for
you
fire,
should
and
do
you're
it.
like, okay, I guess.
You're like, yeah, what does that mean? I'm not going to tell you. Well, thanks for revealing all the information. Let's see if there's anything else if we go a little further.
necessary try her, as she never bothers to give a single reason why you should. Clearly, this is not out of a lack of commitment to her cause, as she is quite willing to burn herself alive, but I guess telling the player why they should seek the Elden Throne is just too far. I mean, self-immolation is one thing, but a conversation with someone, yuck, in its own right.
Does he want the game to, like, convince you through dialogue? Is he saying, like, the whole reason he played Dark Souls 1 was really to avenge Oscar's death? Is that what he's trying to say?
I'm not entirely sure, because right away I didn't have this experience, because right away when you start playing Elden Ring, you meet Melina. She kind of gives you some hints towards what you need to.
No. Right away, you die, and then Melina
Yes.
finds you and saves you, basically.
Yes. Melina arrives on Torrent,
Mm-hmm.
and then she speaks to you.
Yeah.
She introduces herself and says that if you will take her to the foot of the Erd Tree.
Well, where do you start? You start
What?
in this basically like underground place where all these bodies are thrown, all these tarnished bodies are thrown, right? From the Chapel of Anticipation.
Right.
Because that is an actual place. If you didn't know, well, you know. I mean, if you viewers didn't know, you can go there with the imbued sword in the 4 belfries, and so you can imagine that you get taken there once you fail to achieve victory at the Chapel of Anticipation.
Right. But there's a redeeming factor that comes to you that's almost like an angel that comes and redeems you in the face of failure. And so the whole start of the process of what you're doing in the game is a sort of redemptive process. It's you are being redeemed and you are also supposed to be redeeming, and it's sort of that's the guidance of grace is like ultimately is about that sort of redemption or that's why it's an alchemical thing too. It's turning lead into gold, right? That's what you're doing as a redemptive force.
That's why you're tarnished.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Not only, and this is part of why these Souls games are so brilliant, because not only are you trying to take the tarnished world and reform it into something pure and golden again, but you're also doing that with yourself, right? You go from a warrior who is easily beaten by the first enemy they see, right, to being in the end able to conquer everyone. And so we kind of see that process happening within and without.
Exactly.
In fact, I don't think there has ever been so much lore in any of these games before, but at the same time, I also don't think there has ever been so little reason to care about it. For some people, discovering the lore and trying to piece it together is like a game in itself, and some content creators can produce incredible things out of this, but I still believe that the player's experience within the game itself is the most important part, and that the only reason so many people even looked deeper into the lore of past games was because they felt their actions within the game had meant something. As for the lore, I think some of it deserves credit for being creative and interesting.
What does that mean?
But it also seems like there is a huge amount of unoriginality.
Well, he moves on.
For example, the main revelation in Elden Ring is that the ruling organization of this land, the Golden Order, has a dark secret, which is that it's being controlled by a secret power, the Greater Will. But...
Go ahead. Jesus.
That's
secret?
the dark secret. The dark secret of the Greater Will?
The dark secret of the Golden Order is it's being controlled by the Greater Will. As if that...
Wait, as if characters don't tell you specifically.
You read miracles which are like, this is from the Greater Will, used by the Golden Order.
It's like the Greater Will animates these two fingers, you know, the two fingers right at the center of the whole story.
How is that the secret?
This is pretty much the exact same as Demon Souls, and Dark Souls, and Bloodborne.
What?
That is... What? Yeah, what is right?
Okay, wait, how is that true for... I mean, you can say Ludwig, I guess, in Bloodborne is this corrupted figure.
Well, he's saying because the church has a dark secret.
It's like not much of a secret, I guess. At this point,
the church. Well, I mean, if you just start playing the game, you don't know that about the church.
Yeah, I guess.
But I mean, you learn it pretty quick. Like when you get to Old Yarnum, it's like they burned us and left us.
Yeah,
and they sealed off the bridge. Right, and it's pretty apparent they have secrets to begin with. But to say that it's akin to being controlled by the Greater Will...
Well, he's saying that that's the big reveal of the game. Like in all these other games, like that's the big reveal of Bloodborne is that the church has a secret. It's like all the way up through the end of the the DLC as well. You're learning about all the different sins of the past. So I mean, it's not like a secret as much as it is like the nature of the world.
The one with Gwyn, like Gwyn's being controlled by the Greater Will. With the Way of White? No, it seems like they're all...
I guess, I mean, the secret of Gwyn is that he's responsible for the original sin.
Well, that's what they say. Original. Well, I don't even want to say they. That's what Aldia says. You have to put it in context.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the thing with Gwyn is like, it doesn't seem apparent that Gwyn's intentions, let's say, were controlled by another force. But I don't know specifically what he's saying, or if he's even saying that.
And Sekiro. I don't think the corrupt church is a bad trope, but I do think it's an
corrupt church.
Overused trope, particularly by From Software, who seem to operate as if it's a narrative requirement. However, this twist doesn't work quite so well when we see it in every single game. Likewise, we are once more in a dying world, where the history suggests repeating cycles, where there used to be an age of dragons before humans came along, where the current age is being prolonged, leading to stagnation, where death has again went wrong, leading to no one staying dead, and where there is manipulation of unknowable outer gods.
Okay,
Again,
go ahead and
not
pause it.
necessarily.
All of this is true. It engages with all of these patterns, and some of the games engage with some of them engage with a lot of them. But those patterns are larger patterns than Miyazaki's just like narrative trope idea,
Mhm.
right?
It's
Each
not
of
just
these
like,
games
yeah,
is a
the
cosmic
caricature.
picture, meaning that it has to have a functionality beyond just being a single linear narrative, but instead needs to represent a microcosm of being itself. It's a work akin to how someone would want to write, like Nietzsche would want to write, "Thus spoke Zarathustra," in the
Well,
sense that he wants to represent a more cosmic picture with him
and
being like attached to the
sure, and I
mountain.
mean,
And
what kind of world are you intended to come in a cosmic setting? One that's already set in order?
there's no story then.
I know that it's kind of, it's not begging the question. It's like doing the opposite.
Bad ideas, but certainly not new ideas either. Still, now that we have breached the topic of lore, I think it's about time the entire Souls community faces up to a hard truth, which is that telling your story through item descriptions is not good storytelling. And if you disagree with me saying that, perhaps you might believe the man who wrote them all.
Whew. This gets into a huge issue. First of all, this is an appeal to authority. Second of all, this game is not specifically told through item descriptions only. Yes, item descriptions help, but there is plenty of dialogue and environmental storytelling in the game. But let's see what Big M had to say. I bet you it's not as damning as this guy's making it.
Hidetaka Miyazaki, who said on a Japanese podcast after Dark Souls released, but the text is so small that he can't write anything decent and that he kind of gave up with them, saying this wouldn't do for a big title or serious game, but that it was good enough for them. Also, the reason he decided to write them himself as opposed to hiring professional writers was because he was happy to sacrifice quality to allow the game to be developed quicker, and so that he could keep updating them as the game evolved during development.
Wait, was to sacrifice quality?
Yeah, he's saying that Miyazaki writing them would sacrifice quality. Let me go back to that real quick.
Quicker, and so that he could keep updating them.
It says professionals could write those texts together with the dialogues and the screenplay, and that would result in much better quality. Honestly, the reason I'm writing the text is that it prevents the game development from falling behind or having more pressure due to also having to write the text.
Okay, so I think that there's a conflation happening here. See, Miyazaki is talking about why he specifically chose to write them himself. This is not about the justification of the lore being told through this medium, which is the criticism that's being levied at the game right now.
I know, it is not. It's not even on the same topic, basically.
Yes. So I don't think that's Miyazaki saying that he didn't want to tell the story through item
Or
descriptions.
that it's bad to do so.
He says there's not a lot of room for me to tell a story. Not that he doesn't want to tell the story.
Yeah. Well, and also that limitation is sometimes can be a real boon to a production.
Them as the game evolved during development. In the end, this turned out well. Maybe Miyazaki was a better writer than he gave himself credit for, and
this
maybe
was for
having a
Dark
single
Souls.
writer allowed for the end result to be more cohesive. Still, I also think this method worked because it just so happened to be a perfect fit for the game. One of the greatest strengths of Dark Souls' story was its minimalism.
Is that so? Dark Souls 3 minimalism?
Dark Souls 3 is not minimal.
And putting important lore on item descriptions
There you go.
worked well to complement
I was
this,
just wanting to
precisely
get that.
because many players wouldn't feel the need to read them all. So in Dark Souls, story never got in the way, and the game's atmosphere, emotion, and themes were thus given greater emphasis.
What? Well, just because you're choosing to read each of them, I mean, I don't. This is. We're moving on. I'm done with this guy.
So that'll set the stage. There's the criticism that Elden Ring is disappointing and it doesn't have a deep story.
And he thinks that because he's missing the bigger picture of how the ideas are cosmic within Elden Ring, and the symbolism and the themes are actually apparent, right? The creating order out of chaos, whole that idea, the the choice of being pro being or anti being. Those are some of the themes, right?
There's a polarity to it,
Hmm.
but it's like someone in one breath can say, "Oh, well, there's disparity, and that's important for understanding the obvious symbols in Dark Souls," and yet the duality of every single thing in this game, everyone's like, "I don't get it. Why is there two of stuff?"
How? Who can Marika and Radagon have kids?
Maybe,
That's what I'm saying.
maybe,
Maybe.
and yes, and Marika.
All right, so let's get into our next video here. This is the truth about Seethe, which there's a lot of conjecture here and a lot of missing the point, and we're gonna get into it, of course.
All while the lack of direct storytelling.
How is that still playing? Oh, because it's still open.
So in terms of like how old is he versus in terms of relative to the broader setting, he's about, let's say, he's not one of the original Archdragons, so to speak. Like he was born after fire and disparity became a thing. And this is sort of a very important thing when we talk about dragons as general. With like disparity bringing differences to the world, we start seeing evolution sort of develop.
I'm curious about that. Do you agree that Seethe is born after the flame?
I would say that Seethe's existence precludes the realization of the flame. That actually the existence of Seethe is the physical representation of what the flame represents, which is disparity.
Mm-hmm.
And that disparity inevitably had created an imbalance in what was originally the pre-cosmogonic world of Dark Souls. And the recognition of disparity, essentially.
Yes.
That's what the flame is, the recognition of disparity. And it's about what Seethe did with his recognition of disparity.
Yes, and so he almost necessarily has to come before.
Right. I feel like because he is a pre-cosmogonic representation of the same idea.
Because he doesn't, to put it in another way, he doesn't mean the same thing if he comes after the flame. If he's a product of the flame, let's say, if he's post-cosmogonic.
Right, and I think that really just comes down to an interpretation of how we understand things in a more symbolic way. Because to me, everything doesn't have to line up in the sense that it's like this logically begat this logically begat that. Like, I think on a more symbolic level, you've got a pre-cosmogonic world, which is gray arch trees and stone dragons. Then a dragon that is not stone communes with
those below, right?
Yeah, essentially
Mm-hmm.
Hands his generation over to the next generation to create a new age based on disparity being a thing.
Right. Let's go ahead and continue. I just wanted to pause there for a sec.
Where the dragons now have souls and things are sort of changing.
Well, there's another issue. The dragons now have souls. Besides Midir, we do not get a single soul, like a soul item, from a dragon. And those are the actual souls that they're supposed to have, right? Like, the souls you get from killing Gwyn aren't Gwyn's soul.
Right.
And so when we kill Seethe, we actually don't get a soul. And so what he's saying here is not the case, because dragons are intentionally soulless. We have to understand, too, how Dark Souls is a spiritual successor to Demon Souls, because in Demon Souls it says the soul granted clarity. I'm not saying it's the same thing here, but the souls here that are supposedly in dragons cannot be, because otherwise let's say, the pre-cosmogonic structure doesn't allow for the soul and the will to be enacted, let's say.
Yeah. You're not considered to be a conscious being if you have no understanding of the concept of time, essentially, in the future. Because what we're doing when we're thinking in a survival sense is we're acting out what could happen without having to physically act it out. So we can extrapolate our thoughts from reality. And in doing so, we become conscious agents. And that's where the soul sort of becomes attached to us, because then we have an identity, right? We have um, the soul being sort of the spiritual representation of what pattern you're trying to act out as a conscious agent now that you have the gift of free will, which comes with that self-awareness, which comes with that post-cosmogonic knowledge.
Right. And so to say that they had that, not the case.
Changing with them, they have these feelings and these emotions and things which they never had before when they were just rock. So what happens in the aftermath is you have all these different descendants of dragons and species happen, and Sea's one of those early species. We're not at the point now where the dragon blood, so to speak, gets so thin that you're getting wyverns and snakes and all these different.
This it's very much implied that the serpents were around during the age of ancients. So to say that it is because of the fire, it's because of the fire that they became wyverns and snakes, right? I'm not so sure that that is necessarily the case. And that goes into like the world serpent, the cosmic serpents that are, or that inspired Cath and Seath in the first place. Not Seath, Cath and Frampt in the first place.
Right. There's that aspect of it, right, which is the eternal snake that comes before the post cosmogonic world. This the snake in the garden, right, essentially.
Yes.
And so we've got the duality manifest in those two, which is sort of like how would I say? It's like an angel and a demon, I would say. They speak as spirits of a higher order because they originate from a pre-cosmogonic world. And so that's why they're like a polarity of like what the response, basically holding up the responsibility of all of mankind, whether or not you're going to bear the burden of disparity or not.
Right. And I'm trying to find I'm trying to find a source for that real quick, but I cannot. And so to say that too, I'm not sure that like some snakes, I guess, some of the serpents. Do we meet any serpents later on though?
Man serpents.
Yeah, but those are made by Seath.
Right.
Just a
quote unquote lesser races. You're still very early on in that process where it's like, okay, they're still giving birth to other archdragons.
So Seath was born different from other dragons.
Yeah, that's a very, very important thing to note, is that unlike other dragons, he goes completely into the extreme of a moonlight affinity. And you see this in the magic powered crystals that are.
He doesn't have any crystals in the very beginning. I have watched this like 20 times, and I do not see any crystals on him in the same way that there are crystals on him later. It seems like he used the crystals later to try to make himself immortal and to re-put stone on his body, which makes sense for what he's been doing.
Let's break down specifically why Seath represents that. Okay, there are dragons that are stone, meaning that they're eternal. They're eternal in the sense that they themselves have no knowledge of their own mortality. But Seath now represents the next step of understanding, and he becomes self-aware, and he becomes conscious of his mortality in the way that the stone dragons were not conscious because they weren't conscious agents. And so what does he do? But ultimately call for the downfall of the pre-cosmogonic world, ushers it in, and then now is cursed with the knowledge that he is also going to die. And so he's sort of an in-between type of being. He uses the knowledge that can be gained from the humans, essentially, to then try to find a way to prolong his life.
Which is that reflection of the sunlight, right? That he's trying to invoke. He's trying to kind of create his own order by his own experiments and instantiate himself across time, both physically and spiritually. But it's kind of a corrupt process that he's undergoing.
I think that it is a corrupt process for the same reason that you had put out before that this was misguided, was that which is specifically that he doesn't have a soul.
Yes.
He's from a
Exactly.
soulless world, inhabiting a mortal shell. And so what he's doing is he's going down the path of science, essentially trying to find meaning, trying to find a way not to just literally live forever, but to become a higher order being like, uh, how do I say, like an angel, like an idea more than just a physical being, because he's kind of cursed to be a
Well, and
physical
that's the
being.
thing. He hasn't kind of he has that idea, and this is actually something I kind of like about what Loki's saying, kind of, because he's saying that Seath is kind of a midpoint, and I think that that is true in the sense that he understands his mortality, but he doesn't understand the secret to immortality, which is the instantiation across time, right?
Right.
And
And so
so
he gathers it onto himself instead.
he gathers all of that enlightenment, quote unquote, all of the
That's why he's
crystals
got
onto himself.
the library. That's why it's
But he
all about
doesn't-
gathering information.
I do not see them in this, and I've tried to watch it over and over. I don't see any crystals on him here, and I think it's because we haven't even gotten to that post cosmogonic world yet.
No, I think that the crystals are a manifestation of that study
Yes,
of
so we
knowledge
can't see them yet.
and crystallizing it into something that can be used, right?
Mhm.
embedded in his body and things like that. There's this very specific affinity that he's born with, and we have to kind of think about this in terms of like the abstract, like astrological planetary bodies. These things, when you think about them, okay, you have a moon. A moon is like a giant ball of rock, right? And then that ball of rock gets sunlight, and then that sunlight bounces off the moon and becomes moonlight, as we know it. So yeah, kind of have to take this into the context of Dark Souls' world. The idea is that okay, so fire comes into this world of rock, it interacts with it, and it sort of creates this sort of world that's changing. And sort of moonlight is sort of that byproduct of the interaction between flame and stone.
Hmm.
For Seath, though, he's born with a very specific, a very strong affinity to that. The result is a lot of his stone qualities get lost, and we see this. He's not born an immortal archdragon. He's just a regular archdragon. He could bleed. He could die.
A regular archdragon.
He can live a long time because everything except humans lives a long time in Dark Souls. So what happens is that he'll
I mean,
live like
even
hundreds,
humans.
thousands of years, but he will die. He doesn't have that that sort of eternity that's afforded to the rest of him.
And that made
And we already said why that is because Seath has that knowledge, right? Gained from that pre-cosmogonic world where he and the archdragons were, right, in this reaction to the flame, the realization of the enlightenment there that he is going to die, right, that he is mortal. And that's to say, like Brock was saying earlier, like Seath has lived all this time even after that, right? It's he's just aware of it. Like the dragons before Seath didn't even know they could die. They didn't even know they were alive, though. At the same time, there's that duality of it, right?
Right.
him quite jealous of the other dragons, but that also made him a little bit more ambitious because he's all about let's study how do I make myself, I guess, immortal.
Right. Well, so what happens is that the dragons, by their nature, are sort of they don't really do anything, right? Because they're rock. Their idea is, I'm rock, I'm stone, we're eternal, we just there and we exist.
Essentially.
Well, it is to say that there is unknown lands, right? Unknown lands that need to be set in order, and the carving out of dragons to create order out of their civilization, their system,
Right.
right? That's what we see Gwyn do, which is a very holy thing, right? Because when that taking of that which is, and to speak of dragons real quick, what dragons are symbolically, right? They're that super predator from our genetic ancestry, because they are a combination of several predators that preyed on human beings in the past. They're a cat. They have the four limbs of a cat. They have wings like a bird, and they look like a serpent with fiery breath, right? Which, if you get bit by a serpent, right, some serpents, your skin will actually like melt off, and it'll look like you got burned.
And it'll also feel like you're on fire.
Yeah, and so it is a combination of those aspects. And so here we see that the world is filled with predators that are unconscious, right? They're not conscious of themselves, but they're still predators, and it's in an unknown land that is void of features because there's no order in that land, right?
Right. You ask the question: if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, did it make a sound? It's sort of like that. It's not.
Mhm.
It's not a thing that's being consciously processed, and so it needs to have an eye oriented toward it so that it exists in that sort of cosmic sense.
Right.
And so that's what consciousness does. It ultimately breaks apart the stone dragons.
Yes. And that should happen. That's a good thing to happen.
It's the process by which we know the world.
Right. And so Seath crushing the stones there, right? He has now become a part of that order which has been created out of the dragons. You know, seeking that scientismic endeavor of trying to achieve immortality uninstantiated as an idea.
Even through the study of those celestial bodies, right? It's a
Yes.
very astrological sort of thing that he's doing too, with this communion with the moon. And he's pointing out that he is born with this affinity for the moon. And I think it's more along the lines of the way that we gathered our knowledge whenever we did it was by studying the stars and finding patterns and creating.
Mm-hmm.
We mapped time itself by doing that, right? And what is the post-cosmogonic world other than being aware of the future? And so this process that Seath has gone
So
into
even
by
after
having
they-
a relationship with the celestial body itself, it represents kind of what he is in that same sense that we were talking about.
I need to check something really quick.
And so it isn't just that it's, and I like that, the idea of the sun's rays being reflected by the moon, which is a rock, and being used to try to create a new stone scale that Seath could put on himself.
Mm-hmm. And I
Right.
mean, I think that's why he has all the crystals growing on him.
Right,
Especially
I think,
going out at the beginning. I'm
and
curious.
that carries over to Elden Ring, right? Because of the way that crystals manifest through the study of the reflection of light on other celestial bodies, right?
Uh-huh.
I think that's intentionally what Miyazaki's doing with crystals even from this point, is that it's tied to scholarship and gaining knowledge, but not necessarily wisdom. It delineates the type of knowledge that isn't tied to
Right.
insight and wisdom.
And it's kind of why Logan goes mad, right?
Right.
Takes off all his clothes and pretends like he's a dragon.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go ahead and continue.
They get souls and they start getting emotions and sex drives and all these things.
What is happening? Why is this happening? First of all, we've already addressed the souls thing. We can presume they were having sex before that. This isn't literally nothing happened. This is just a pre-cosmogonic, pre-order world that exists.
A pre-logos world.
Yeah, it's not.
They're still, for the most part, not very ambitious. They don't build these complex societies that we see with quote-unquote true life later on.
True life.
I don't know what that's supposed to mean.
I think he's saying that the dragons didn't build cities
Oh, okay.
like the true life that later builds cities. There's a delineation, and it's actually very attuned to the soul, and it's the reason why dragons don't drop souls.
Though is different because again, he's more like he is more basically that true life now. He doesn't have any of that stone element that's going to sort of like anchor him in place, so to speak. So instead, he's like, I have this mortality. I'm like vulnerable. I have to fix this. And obviously, there's also the issue of being like you say, there's the jealousy aspect. I'm the ugly duckling, so to speak, right?
Seath's the ugly duckling. That's what it was.
He's pretty ugly.
He did it because he was jealous.
Yep.
Which is
He got all these feelings because he got a soul.
He got a soul. He got the first soul, and he was like,
First soul.
"Oh man, this sure sucks having a soul. These guys they all have girlfriends, and I can't get one."
Mm-hmm. Goodness.
And he desperately wants to become a swan. So
Oh.
his idea is, I have to somehow give myself the stone scales that I lack.
Mhm.
His idea for this is, okay, well, I have this certain magical affinity unlike the others. If I look into that, I explore how that works, how it goes.
See, I'm not so sure that he was. I don't know where he's getting that he was born with that. I'm trying to find some sources to back it up. One of them here, the Moonlight Greatsword, it says the sword, one of the rare dragon weapons, came from the tail of Seath the Scaleless, the pale white dragon who betrayed his own. Seath is the grandfather of sorcery, and the sword is imbued with his magic, which shall be unleashed as a wave of moonlight. I guess it's his magic, yeah. It's just it seems like to me that he goes into this discovery of crystals in the moon rather
Yeah.
than being innately in it.
Yeah,
right?
I just don't think that it. I don't know why you would say it that way. That
Well,
he has
also
this
think about
affinity
this.
for it as much as it's.
Here, this you get cut from his tail, which he
Mhm.
has like grown out now these crystals from.
Right.
That may have affected it. I don't know. I mean, this is obviously a weapon that has to be in every Souls game as well because thanks from.
From software.
So, anyways,
Yeah, well, I don't think we even have the time to get into the Moonlight Greatsword as a concept, though. I mean,
yeah,
why
no,
it has to
not-
be in
not
every game
really.
and everything like that. But suffice to say that Seath's magic, his sorcery, the way that he affects the world, is inspired by his study and his communion with celestial bodies.
Those, then
Yes.
maybe I could be able to manipulate that in order to get sort of like reverse engineer it and give myself the scales that I like, right? Like I got to figure out what the problem is. And that's how he becomes the founder of sorcery. Now, the localization terms it as like the grandfather of sorcery, but the Japanese term is very simply he's like the founder, the pioneer, like the parent who establishes the entire like sort of concept of studying magic in this rational scientific sort of basis.
And to study all that stuff, to get all that knowledge, he needs a facility, doesn't he?
Yeah. So he didn't have that for the longest time, though. And we know from, like, say, his interactions with Havel and stuff, that he was already working on developing sorcery and creating all these different arts, like, say, his crystal breath, in order to sort of get a better idea of what's going on with his body. And he sort of figures out, okay, there's this moonlight affinity that I have, and then there's this thing with crystals and crystallization. And he sort of starts sort of piecing it together that, okay, crystals are sort of this mineralization that occurs after fire and disparity
See, I think he has it. I'm not.
sort of comes
Hold on.
into
Let me
sort of,
finish
it
this.
interacts with a mineral substance, the rock, and then it sort of forms these
See, he's missing the cosmic concept of it, which, if we think to our own planet's origins, why we have iron and gold in our soil and our land is because of the idea of a pre-Earth, right? Earth existed before, well, not necessarily before, but a sun in a solar system existed before, and then that sun exploded, and what formed from there were the planets in our solar system, right? And so that idea of the sun's interaction, the light interacting with it, he's kind of missing that. He's using just fire.
Right. And what I think that Miyazaki loves this idea of time being tied into looking into distances, and that's essentially what you're doing. Is you're looking into the past whenever you gaze up into the sky, into the night sky, and you see a star. You're seeing it's taken literally light years to travel to you, right?
Uh-huh.
So you're gazing into sort of a snapshot of a cosmic past, so to speak. And you see him play with that idea even in Dark Souls 3, especially towards the end where everything's collapsing in on itself as this sort of eventuality where space is being flattened as time is coming to an end. The time being tied to the cosmic idea, as well as that what Seath is doing is he's taking that he's getting from communing in that sense with the light from the moon. He's taking that, which also is tied into being able to commune with your unconscious, right? So tie that into, for instance, communing with your ancestors, communing with the past or the cosmic past. Anyway, on and on. So Seath is channeling some of that mystical, how do I say, power of being a dragon in the first place to be able to create these crystals, which are literal crystallizations of ideas, crystallizations of knowledge that he has that he's able to take onto himself, because in this communion he is almost a thing. He's almost a stone dragon, but he's not quite. So he can become partially
another
stone.
thing where like he's I like how Loki says he's in between, but then he gives the complete wrong reasons for it.
Right,
He is an in between.
Yes, because it's a hybridity to him, and because of him being a dragon, he can create he can create a facsimile of the concept of the stones that represent that timelessness through looking into this cosmic past. But
Mhm.
he can never go back, right? There is no going back from becoming conscious. So it's really a practice of unconsciousness that he's ultimately going towards.
In a futile endeavor, which is why it kind of drives him mad,
Right.
Science will never give you the answer and the meaning.
He's essentially trying to derive an ought,
Mm-hmm.
to be an
Exactly.
idea and not just, a meaningless conscious agent that
Right.
eventually dies for no reason, right?
That's kind of what he dreads.
And
Crystals.
he can't derive the ought from the is, and the only way that he knows how to function because he doesn't have that soul, that animating
And that's actually
factor,
a
is
good
science.
segue, because the fact that he can't derive the ought from the is why there are so many bad things that happen under Seath's watch or in
Right.
Seath's lands or hands.
We see this
Exactly.
consistently throughout the series. Like Dark Souls 3, for example, you get Chaos Gems. The Chaos Flame runs wild, it's scarring the earth, and any Titanite that got caught into that massive blast starts forming gems.
I mean, you get all kinds of gems though. You get what is a simple gem?
From crystallizing into do it, and the chaos gems are basically identical to the crystal sage's crystal gems, save for the color and stuff, right? So same thing with like Estus Flask, for example. You have Estus Flask that you get the warm Estus, the heat of the bonfire captured in a bottle, but then when it cools down, it becomes Ashen Estus. Then suddenly we get some crystals forming onto the bottle and things like that. So again, it's a very consistent idea. Is this idea that there's this sudden heat and then it sort of cools down and forms crystals as a result. And see,
Think we can move on?
sees, okay,
Very
so
soon. Let me just
souls
finish
are
out
the
this.
power of disparity themselves. This is made clear, obviously, in Dark Souls 1, just how everything interacts and everything.
Yeah, I mean,
Which is why the dragons don't and can't have them.
yeah.
Yes.
That's
That's
specifically
the point.
the whole point is disparity. That specifically is, it's not disparity itself, it is the knowledge of disparity.
And so there's a lot here. And I will just say quickly, Loki goes on to make some assertions about Seath marrying Guinevere and then them having a bad marriage, and then um, I don't think Seath marries Velka, but Velka and him have a kid, is what he's saying is Priscilla. But it's not so much to get into all that. It's really a lot he's missing a lot of the points. And so a lot of the conclusions he's going to arrive at are not, and as you've seen us breaking it down, are not going to make
There's even
sense.
worse conjecture afterwards as well. I would say give it a watch just to see if there's anything that
We'll definitely link it
convinces you
below.
off of our side of the
Right, and I
of
mean
reasoning.
to not to appeal to popularity, but a lot of the comments below also kind of follow in that same line that we're talking about.
power of life and all this.
Oh, we'll continue. Or we'll move on. Let's move on. Gave him a good few minutes. We are now on non-binary disparity.
Talked about this.
So this one is Sinclair lore cast, not really to pick on them. Really, the last one was a response to Loki, not them anyways.
Before.
So here, this is when Jake the Ashen Hollow comes in, and these are some of the theories from both JSF and Jake. That again miss the cosmic side and the actual meaning behind the reason that these things are the way they are.
Dark Souls 2's translation made it a little weird because they talk about it like there is actually a cycle of light and dark that's going light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. But the way it's really like set up to work is that there's the Age of Fire, and then the Age of Fire is just ending, and there's not been an Age of Dark yet. And it's just like,
And so this is the issue that I'm having already, because the Age of Fire and the Age of Dark, right? That dark light dichotomy, just because the dark comes along, and I think this is what is made clear with the other two games of Dark Souls, is the Age of Fire and the Age of Dark is really the same age. It's the age of disparity.
Yes.
And so here, when he's saying this, it's like, you're missing the point.
Like there shouldn't be an age of dark. Once there
Yes.
is an age of light, There should not be an Age of Dark.
Correct, unless
And
we're
that
we're
it's not
Flame
that
of
it's a
Frenzy.
necessary thing to happen, because I don't like this interpretation that it's like, oh
Next
well, it's
comes the
good
Age
for
of Dark.
you to
It's
turn
all
away from the
Kath.
light.
It's all Kath. Kath is the one that says the thing that everyone repeats, which is like, Gwyn betrayed the natural order. There should be an Age of Dark.
Which is saying you should all be stone dragons. You should all be unconscious bloatheads.
It's even worse. Yeah, it's not even dragons. It's bloaties.
Right, because there's no way back. Right.
Yes.
The endeavor of going back, as
Yes.
Miyazaki shows in almost every one of his games, is corrupting to the point that it creates insanity itself.
Mm-hmm. And so you have the bloatheads who take glee and malice against you, and they have eyes, mucus-covered sacks over their heads that are covered in eyes. Those like red eyes that gaze out at you, and it's really made to instantiate the Age of Dark. Right, is one which can see and with malice, and will take glee in that malice. It's not a good thing. And so I don't think this is the way it's supposed to work, is there's an Age of Dark.
Right.
It doesn't seem apparent.
Like when the Age of Dark happens, that's just the next phase the world is going to go into. It's like if you look at some mythologies, like I think Mesoamerican mythology does this. You also have like the...
So what he's talking about is, I think what he's talking about is the end of the Mayan calendar, when the world is destroyed.
I hope that's
You're
not
making a good case.
I hope that's not it.
Why? I think that's
because
what he's talking about.
because that is basically saying that ultimately it's just the bad ending, right? But
well, then
the
that
position
that actually
isn't that it
vindicates
is.
Gwyn so
Yeah,
much more if that's the case.
Yeah, Gwyn did nothing wrong then,
I mean, he already
considering he did whatever was necessary to prevent the apocalypse.
did. Is it better to be or not to be?
Yeah, that's the question.
mythology of like a golden age and a silver age and everything. Like there was an age of ancients, now there is an age of fire. When the age of fire is ended, there will be another age, and it will be distinct and different.
Yeah, and that is kind of illustrated in Dark Souls 3 with the beginning of the painting and that whole side quest you have in the, like the very end of the game.
Right, being symbolic of the burning of the current order, right?
From the Age of Fire, we will not go back. We will not do the same thing again.
But it's not the Age of Dark.
No, it's changed.
So what I see like the Age of Fire as, it is the midpoint or the end point or whatever between these two poles. They are pulling against each other constantly. It's not a binary, really. They want it to be a binary. The gods, the people who are in charge, they want there to be this binary, like, hey, there's just light and there's just dark and there's just life and there's just death. Because that's sort of the world that they came into. That's the world they understand. That's the world that they can control. And then what...
So my kind of issue there is it's attributing a lot of like malice to the gods, right?
Right.
Like, oh, they just want to control because they know it. And it's like, yeah, but maybe it's because they know it. And
I mean, that's because all success is an indicator of a just thirst for power, right?
Oh yeah, it's all power all the way down.
What's happening by the time of Dark Souls 1 and then following on 2 and 3 is that binary is falling to pieces. Like the tug has sort of like pulled it away from that towards something that's more ambiguous. And that's why the worlds of 1, 2, and 3 are the way they are. It's why suddenly people are born and they don't die, because like the notion of life and death is sort of breaking down.
See, and that's the thing. I'm not. He says that, and I think what he's meaning that. No, I don't know, because I've heard in another video this same person say that it's because the undead curse, right? Because Gwyn is trapping their humanity. That's why they turn undead. So they can break the cycle. But I'm not so sure that it's those ideas breaking down.
No, it's not. The state of things and the undead curse is very much like in Elden Ring, where death has been removed from the equation and hidden away. It's a necessary aspect of this picture that you are representing a pattern, and you're not just one instantiation, right? You're finding a pattern of being that will succeed.
Like Solaire says,
And I don't think that's an indicator that the binary is breaking down. I don't think
Right.
that it points to that, the fact that it's working that way. I think it's working that way because of really the binary is at work.
Mm-hmm.
Time is convoluted because the notion of beginnings and endings has started to fall apart. So
So the beginning, that part where he's talking about time being convoluted. Now to address that, I wouldn't say it's so much because we don't even have like that notion of beginning and end right before the dragons, because that's kind of the beginning, is that age of disparity. And so in this, when he's saying it's because of that it's breaking down, it's not so much that it's that these, and this is a spiritual place, and so the spirits of these, and by that I mean the modes of being that are adopted by these NPCs, um, can transcend time, because that's what spirits can do, right? Transcend time, and especially because what you were saying earlier about death being hidden away, um, they can transcend time, and they have no, let's say, impetus to die, especially because if they're spiritual in nature.
Right. And there's, how would I say, because you're acting out a pattern in the game in the sense that when let's say in more orthodox Christian understanding, dying and going to heaven doesn't mean that you get to go to some other physical place where you get to be happy and see people and you still have an embodiment. It sees what I think is a more realistic way of looking at it, which is that we are patterns tied up into an embodiment, and then whenever we move on, whenever this instantiation of that pattern dies, the pattern lives on in a more cosmic sense,
Mm-hmm.
and that eternal life is the pattern that echoes through eternity that you left behind in your wake.
Right, and the ultimate pattern that we see in that religion is Jesus, right? And his pattern has, and
Has lived on.
I don't think you could argue that it hasn't.
No,
Definitely not.
that's what the whole faith is about, and
Mm-hmm.
so the idea of you acting out a pattern that has a death rebirth motif in it, it's
Is
like
not
you're
constrained
trying,
by time.
right, you get to live the same moments over and over. The characters that you're fighting are always back at the same positions, right?
Yes.
And so it's sort of like you're participating in the selective process that is because of disparity, because of the decisions you make, looping over and over to create the hero.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. I don't know so much that it's that it's breaking down.
So what they're getting at with the ash in 3, the reason they keep invoking ash and they're invoking trees and dragons and stuff, is it's taking you back to the beginning of 1, before these 4 souls sort of were wrought upon the world.
I don't think that's true, because when we go to Gale at the end, at the very end, that doesn't, it's not really it's not the same, and I'll tell you why. The potentiality of the world that we see at the end of 3 is not the same as the potentiality that we see at the beginning of 1, because the dragons aren't there to carve order out of, and that's on purpose.
It's all a desert.
Yes.
There is no
It's
more
not the
habitable
same.
space.
It's not the same.
Right.
Before all these things started to like have a defined form, it's kind of going back to that. But then at the same time in 3, they are invoking the notion of like, well, there is going to be another age following this. What will it be? So you get like the profaned capital with like the Manus monsters crawling around. And you get Aldrich talking about like the future will be a great sea, and you have the deacons of the deep. The future will be like the deep and the dregs and the things that live inside the dregs and everything, because the world.
If you want to understand the deep and the dregs and why it's talking about that in Dark Souls 3, in a cosmic sense, Ratatosker has a pretty good video talking about the weight of souls and what the deep sea, how the deep sea interacts with souls. It's not literally like, oh, the next age is going to be a flood.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more cosmic than that.
It's changing again. I guess like the nature of the dark is just that's what will happen when there is no fire. It's not like, the dark, like it's some sort of like villain from a like 80s fantasy movie or something. It's just like this is just the natural way.
How reductive and how wrong because we see what the dark in this game. We see what the dark looks like. And I would
There's
also
a face of the dark.
Yeah.
It's mad, covered in extra eyes.
Yes. And we see that multiple times across the games what the dark actually looks like. And it's not good. It's not a good thing. The whole idea is
It has an
we'll play it
embodiment.
at the end.
It has an
we have
embodiment.
we have
just
a
as-
good quote at the end to play.
Yeah, but it has an embodiment just as much as the player character does in this game specifically.
Yes.
Right? Everything
And
is a
Cath,
pattern.
really? You're gonna trust Cath? I don't understand.
Things will progress. You introduce light into the world, the light fades away, you're left with the dark. Like,
See, and that thing too, it kind of goes against the idea of the brighter the flame, the stronger the shadow, right? Which is to say, the strength of the light is proportional to the strength of the dark in some manner.
that's just how it sort of functions.
Right. Oh, well, I have here a Dark Souls trilogy compendium, which
Really?
Amazing.
yeah, there's about 50, 60 pages of lore in the beginning of it, and some of it's quite interesting and adds kind of a new perspective on what we knew from before. And I'd like to read a paragraph, if I might.
What is happening?
Thus, ages of fire and dark are characterized by opposing forces and can be compared to the changing of seasons from summer to winter, albeit on a far broader and more consequential scale. An age of fire is a period of time ushered in by Lord of Cinder, during which the power of light is strongest and the divine beings aligned with light are prosperous, while an age of dark is heralded by a Dark Lord as the light fades, and is a time during which the world is dominated by humankind.
According to Cath. Do those bloat heads look very human to you?
To have inflamed egos with perspectives that don't belong to themselves, laughing gleefully at the failures of everyone around them. Yeah, that's pretty human.
Good God. It is, but it actually is the darkness of man.
Yeah.
Which is why you're supposed to fight against it. You're not supposed to be like, well, that's just what's going to happen.
I mean, that if you understand that, then you understand why Gwyn did the things that he did.
Interesting, but it doesn't.
It puts it in
obviously
perspective,
doesn't
for sure.
answer the definitive question of how many ages has there been.
Then why did you read it, Jake?
I told you, as soon as she gets used to you, she'll start doing this.
Good. I encourage it. I can take it. I have 2 children, two young
I
daughters,
think we can probably move on from this one, huh?
Cute.
and
Let's see
they
if
are
there's anything else.
They're Nito, Gwyn, and the Witch.
ooh,
but-
a piece of candy.
Yeah. But the more that like we've looked into it, particularly with people who've done like work on the Japanese script and like we talk with Loki a lot, the more we've
My
looked into
goodness.
it, the more it's like no.
Such an appeal.
All it's saying is from
This goes back to our last video. I just want to reiterate it. It's such an appeal to
To populace. And,
Yeah.
And also to authority.
yeah, I mean, it's those that worked on the translation. I mean, a lot of the translation is really good.
Yeah.
Really solid, and it actually doesn't go away from the spirit of the thing. Is what the most important part. And so when he says these things, it's just like, you know, it's not offering any great insight, but they act like it is.
Yeah, not all attention is good attention. Like, you can pay attention to literally an infinite number of things.
Yes.
And some of those things are relevant and useful, and some of those things are not. And we're at that point where it's just people seem to think any attention is good attention,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll focus on trying to find some difference that was lost in the translation so that we can understand the game better. And
And we
occasionally
don't
there's
have to analyze it, right? You're
occasionally
just
there's little
trying to
bits
see-
of insight, but as far as our understanding of it,
really hasn't changed.
nothing has really changed from
Nothing
that.
has really changed.
the dark, they, as in everything, came. That's
Right.
not a dragon. So presumably, however it works, like Gwyn, Nito, and the Witch were kind of already down there, sort of like they were now, just not as powerful. They found the
Well, we have to remember too, the souls give them that form because we see them at the beginning. None of them have any form. They're all like hollow, basically.
Right.
That's intentional.
3 souls, and then when it's like and the furtive pygmy so easily forgotten, it's actually because this is again, it's like a translation thing, because we know now that like there's apparently 8 of these quote unquote pygmy lords, and there wasn't one.
Right.
Because I guess like Japanese does stuff with plurals that like it can translate weirdly.
I don't think it matters. It literally does not matter.
No, I think that's
But
an
they-
arbitrary.
It's such an arbitrary, and that's why it wasn't translated. And plus, when we see the furtive pygmy, it's just one of them. It doesn't matter.
Basically, like as far as we can tell, it just means that like the hollows, like what we know of as hollows, they collectively found
Right.
the dark soul and they split it among themselves, as opposed to one specific furtive pygmy found it and then they split it among them. It's actually like, no, your ancestors collectively found this thing and they shared it among
Right.
themselves. Yeah.
Like when you say we went to the moon in 1979, you don't
Yeah,
mean
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got it.
Doesn't matter. We can move on. Let's move on. All right, so this is our last video. Yeah, this is our last video. So we named that one Non-Binary Disparity because we wanted to talk about the binary and how it's missing the point of the thing to say the age of disparity is simply the age of fire and then the age of dark, especially because we've seen what the age of dark is, and it's not just what Jake was reading there. I also want to mention that was from Future Press, what he was reading from. So an official source, for sure, but the age of dark being characterized by humanity being strong,
Well, it says humanity dominating the world, which is exactly what it would be, and that's what we sort of live in.
The darkness of man dominating the world, though.
Right. Well, this is the multiplicity of eyes that we've taken onto ourselves in reality.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we have dominated the world in the sense that there is no more area to carve out. There is no more chaotic there, right?
It's ash.
Yes.
Good transition. All right, so we're going to watch this last one. This is a good video. This is one that will kind of tie these things together, what we've been saying. And
yeah, I really just want to give a platform to this explanation because it's very strong.
You have the timestamp, right?
And when applying Joseph Campbell's research on the myth to Miyazaki's work, we find Dark Souls was written in the recognizable handwriting of the myths that came before it. For example, fire theft was a common trope of the hero's journey.
The story of Prometheus going after the fire and bringing it back and benefiting humanity and suffering for it.
I mean, Prometheus brings fire to mankind and consequently civilization. That's, by the way, a universal theme.
What is?
The hero, the fire theft theme usually with a relay race after it. It's a worldwide myth. The fire theft.
Let's tie this into the Promethean myth, right? Which is that Prometheus stole the fire from the gods and brought it to man and created the age of civilization out of that. What created our ability essentially to become self-aware.
Yes.
It is very similar to the eating of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, which introduces disparity, into
that which
the knowledge of
the
disparity.
knowledge is
And then,
punished in both senses, right?
And what's the punishment in the Promethean myth?
That he's chained to a rock and he has his liver pecked out every day and then it regrows at the end of the day.
So it's just being trapped then in the death rebirth cycle.
Yes. It's like you like this cycle so much, right? Or you like the disparity of it so much, this is going to happen every day then.
Right.
And it is to say too, it is a worldwide myth, and the myths that we're getting into are very poignant. I can't even say it as well as Mr. Campbell.
Of course.
There's something symbolic in this motif of the hero's journey that resonates with us, and that's the reason we partake in a fire relay in Dark Souls. Through the game's mechanics complementing its story, we don't pass off the flame between other people, but rather we pass the flame between ourselves.
Okay, so this is tying into what I was saying, where we're acting out a pattern of being rather than just one embodiment, right?
Yes.
And so in that sense, the way that you could say the greater will selects for success, you get to play it out to find which pattern is successful.
And I want to say here, it's not that you're passing the fire to yourself. You're just one step of the relay here.
Right, self being
an
embodiment.
Capital S self.
Yeah, self being an idea that spans embodiments,
Mhm.
right?
Or as seen through the game's mechanics, from checkpoint to checkpoint, we slowly make the same divine journey that Gwyn did to link the flame. Now before you dismiss this as useless information, and I'm sure some of you already have, this actually matters, because as Campbell saw it, speaking through myth was a universal language that all humans could understand.
Which is true. It's actually
Yes.
a better language than because language is clumsy.
I sometimes like
people
to
know
liken
this.
it to Enochian, the language of the gods, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a universal language that transcends our perception of language.
It's pretty beautiful in the same way that math is beautiful
Yes.
when you understand like astrological math, right?
And more
It's
importantly,
sublime.
it's more effective at transferring that message to the audience. And if we look carefully enough, we'll see the outline of the most popular creation myth in Dark Souls, when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
We actually have a whole talk about Adam and Eve whenever we talk about Dragon Ball.
Yep.
So I recommend you checking out that on our channel if you have the time or like Dragon Ball.
When man had eaten of the fruit of the first tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he is said to have been expelled from the garden. He had already expelled himself from the garden.
That's seethe, right? He's already expelled himself.
Yes.
He's already
He has expelled himself from the garden
with the knowledge.
by aiming his attention toward disparity.
The garden is the place of unity, non-duality, non-duality of male and female, non-duality of man and God, non-duality of good and evil. You eat the duality and you're on the way out.
And there's no going back, which is exactly why the Nameless King is misguided.
He's erased from the annals of history.
That's why, yeah.
Yeah.
Ours is a mythology that's based on the
Which I think I would have to read in the Abyssal Archive, but I think that is not Loki's interpretation.
No,
side of
I don't believe
duality.
so.
And so our religion tends to be ethical in its accent. Sin and atonement, right and wrong. It started with a sin, you see.
According to the biblical myth, gained from eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil is the knowledge of God, the knowledge to see the world in the same way that God does, through duality.
Based.
And that's the reason followers of this myth are instructed to live moral lives, because a moral life is a life lived with God working through his followers.
And it's not just that, it's it's incumbent upon one's person once they have that knowledge to use it properly.
That's why in some religions there are multiple afterlives. There's purgatory for those who don't know about it, but a responsibility, and a hell for those who do know about it.
Well, also, even purgatory, the responsibility is there, cognizant or not.
Right. Well, a better articulation, of course, always shows that. But there's specifically codified this sort of understanding of the responsibility that comes with witnessing the pattern.
Right.
As we're going to see, the fire and the forbidden fruit share the same meaning in our creation.
Not exactly, but
for the sake of
this, I will go with it. But yeah, I would say that fire and the sun being very linked to fire and Gwyn, right? The sun is not the same as the fruit. Like the sun doesn't give you the knowledge.
Yeah,
of good and evil, but
we can get into why in this story it's fire specifically another
Yes.
time.
Because both events mark humanity's understanding of the dual nature of the world. The only difference
that
is Dark
insofar as what he's making the point, perfect. It's fine.
Yeah.
Souls doesn't call it duality, but rather disparity.
But then there was fire. And with fire came disparity. Heat and cold.
So just like in the Garden of Eden, the flame brings with it duality. But along with that recognition of the dual nature of the world,
Well, hold on. Because it wasn't the garden that brought that. It was a serpent.
It was the serpent in the garden, which is in this game.
both of these myths in our creation give us something else. It gives us a path to a meaningful life.
If the world is a mixture of good and evil, you do not put yourself in accord with it. You identify with the good and you fight against the evil.
So that right there is like a distillation of it, and there is no Age of Dark. And there should never be an Age of Dark. And that's why the next games aren't an Age of Dark, because Miyazaki's actually pretty white-pilled about people.
That's why the good ending of Dark Souls 3 is still struggling with whatever flame is left.
Yeah.
Because you may feel that you have inherited a world where that flame is flickering, but that doesn't mean that you give up on it and embrace dark.
Exactly. And, well, Dark Souls 3 has a whole weird ending with the DLC as well. But, right, the original good ending of that.
Yeah.
Definitely. I don't even, like, is the painting an ending? Because it kind of is, but it isn't.
Well, both of the DLC endings kind of are and are not endings.
I know, right?
They're extrapolations of the idea.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing in Dark Souls. Our purpose is to not put ourselves in accord with the dual nature of the world, but to fight for the light and against the dark. As many of you know, however, the chosen undead is offered a choice. They can either not rekindle the flame, as encouraged by Darkstalker Kath, or they can sacrifice themselves to rekindle it, and that's encouraged by Kingseeker Frampt. But if you don't trust these guys to give you a wholesome option, that might have something to do with the fact that there's a cultural distrust for serpents, because this too is...
Serpents are also primordial. I have no idea where that proof is, but I'm like 99% sure that these guys were around in the Age of Ancients.
I mean, even the image of the Ouroboros is a snake eating its tail, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's pre-cosmogonic.
It's literally pre-cosmogonic.
Reminiscent of the snake who offered Eve the forbidden fruit.
Yes.
Campbell notes...
But I would also mention the other serpent, Seath, that we know, right, who betrayed his own, just to mention that.
That there's an important reason that myths commonly use snakes as a vessel for change. Because to the people telling these stories, snakes are representative of the fact that they shed their skin and are reborn from what they leave behind. And that is, after all, the state of the world in Dark Souls, where the fire is fading and needs to be rekindled.
Well, that idea, right, and it's interesting that snakes are kind of seen as an unholy creature, because that idea is very holy, right? The shedding of one's dead self to become something new.
Yeah, I think that there's why the serpent in this game is two serpents, and one is sort of holy and one is unholy. One is encouraging you and one is discouraging you, because there's
demoralizing.
Because we don't think that it's a bad thing that we have gained the knowledge of good and evil. We call it a sin, but at the same time, we would not know to call it a sin if we never gained the knowledge of good and evil, and so everything must follow, right?
Yes.
And so it always comes down to that question of the goodness of being, which is the goodness of consciousness.
Well, and it's kind of to say, too, that Gwen has almost answered that conundrum, right? Because what is the answer to evil in the world, right?
It is self-sacrifice in the service of love, essentially.
Well, in service of everything good. Everything good, right? Exactly. And so now we don't see what we would have seen, which would have been interesting. I would have been interested to see if the Nameless King was more like a Christ figure and he was the one that was sacrificed. But that's not the story we get. We get Gwyn himself sacrificing him for the things that are good and to preserve the order of the world, because it's good to do so, and that living is better. Living, even flawed, in a flawed system, is better than absolute chaos and darkness.
Right.
But it's not the result of the choice that matters. What matters is what the choice represents. The player now sees the world in the same way that Gwyn did, and they will make their choice in the same place that Gwyn did, when he decided that he would change the world. So should the player make a dark world for humans, or a world of light and dark that the gods valued? It is the player character that will decide the fate of humanity. It's beautiful stuff, and it succeeds in its goal that all myths set out to accomplish, for the player to see God in themselves through experiencing it.
I don't know if that's a point of... Is that? Maybe. Point of myths. I don't know if it's to see God in oneself. But to see the self...
I mean, yes, it is, in a sense.
In a sense, yeah. I see what he's going with.
For seeing the world through a lens of duality is the same lens through which the gods view the world. Miyazaki carefully designed his myth to have the same symbolism of the myths that came before it. So even though it might have different details, we still recognize the meaning behind those details. And just as Campbell foretells, Miyazaki's version of the myth ends up contributing to a transcendental experience, because the player now feels like they have been a part of something that is much bigger than they are.
Because it is.
And that idea to sacrifice that which is best to continue on forward, right? That is a holy idea, and that's why in Christianity Jesus is the best conceptualization, right, of man.
Right. It
And
goes to
so-
the point, the highest point, the axis mundi,
Yes.
and then establishes that as the cross or the point of maximal suffering in service of rejuvenating the human spirit with the Spirit of God.
And moralizing and such to say that like the knowledge of good and evil is now and this is why Christ redeems sinners, is because his action and God's action by allowing him to be sacrificed shows the path forward and the answer to the fact of good and evil. And it's to what Joseph Campbell said: choose the light and be in accord with it and fight against the dark as much as possible. Be as integrated with the good as you can.
Right, and there's also the element in the Jesus story where he is tempted by the devil and reminded that it's not necessarily his responsibility because he's the Son of God and he can do what he wants, right? And so there has to be the aspect of choice there. He's not just doing it on behalf of his own fellow humans, but he's a superordinate version of the story. He is, the child of a god, right? He's sort of this cosmic orphan in that sense. And that shows up in all of these myths as well, right? While we see that we're an outsider, for instance, like we mentioned earlier, we embody that archetypal story that Christ represented so well by being that in the same sense, having the dubious origin be a piece of it.
Exactly. I think, are we going to get into the invert? I don't think we
don't really need to. We haven't talked much about Bloodborne in this video.
Because and I think that's to say because I think Elden Ring and Dark Souls, in the way they tell their story, in the way the themes are represented and handled, are more similar than the ways that Bloodborne or Demon Souls would do it.
Right. They approach things in a more an inverted sense. They're darker stories, and so you're dealing with unholy representations of some of the ideas.
Yeah.
Whereas you only see the holy versions in Dark Souls.
Yeah, and it's both Dark Souls and Elden Ring to me are very moralizing stories where
right.
Not saying Bloodborne is a demoralizing story. I think they're all in their own way can be moralizing. But it is what you're saying, and that's actually something about Diablo that I really like, is that it is an unholy manifestation of a story that actually goes into depth about it. And I'm not so sure, like, there are characters in Bloodborne that do it, but the participation in Diablo is just amazing. I'll get into it sometime.
What I would like to do, sort of to wrap up what we've been talking about, is tie it back into our first video, which was saying that.
Do we want anything else here? Is there anything else? Do you remember?
No.
Okay.
That was the main sort of point that I wanted to bring up, was that it's not just us. Like, we're not the only people who are over here beating the mythological drum to find the meaning behind some of this media. It's just that once you can put enough of the pieces where they belong, then Miyazaki's intentions make sense, right? It's not arbitrary little details as much as it is context that you need to understand the themes of the game. So coming back to this one, it's like, oh, well, there's just no theme to the story of Elden Ring. It's like,
there definitely is.
We have now established all the ways that it has similarities. Well, not specifically how it has the similarities, but all the ways that things that are very much similarities tie into a cosmic framework. Now, all you need to know to start piecing it together from that point on is that the Erdtree is like Yggdrasil. And that is the most obvious thing in the entire game. It's the first thing your eyes are drawn to.
And then you can start piecing everything together.
So if you had played Dark Souls and really understood what the themes were, you would come into Elden Ring and see what it's trying to talk about immediately.
Yes, and that actually segues nicely into our next video. Not our next video we're going to cover here, but the next stream we're going to do, which is about people saying that Elden Ring is incomprehensible.
And responding to the criticisms of the incomprehensibility of its lore and how things seem to be arbitrary or absurd for the sake of absurdity.
So I'm back in the first video. Which part were you wanting me to
I didn't want to play necessarily any of it. I just want to speak to...
it. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we can play it in the background while we talk, but
No, it's fine.
but I
It's
just want to tie in why it is that we're pointing at Dark Souls lore in response to this, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's pretty foundational, I think, and that's one of the reasons. But yeah, I think this was a pretty good stream. We went over a couple videos here. So we went over Elden Ring is disappointing. We talked about the depth of the story, specifically not being unfathomable. Like this guy levied some criticism that we countered in the Elden Ring side, right? And how he says that some things happen in the other games that don't happen in Elden Ring, but they actually kind of do. But this is to say that the grasping of the story and the analysis of the story really for Elden Ring is kind of missing. And so the depth of the story is not being matched. And then we looked at Poor Seethe, which was a lot of conjecture, which kind of muddies the water and even reaching the depths because you get so involved with some of the details that you miss the forest for the trees.
Right.
Then we looked at non-binary disparity, which we were saying is a kind of a misreading of the story, because if you go deep enough, you find that it is exactly what we've been saying is that it's to struggle with the light against the dark. It's not that the dark is going to come next. And even what Brock was saying about Dark Souls 3 was good, about how even if the flame is meager at the end, it's still the good choice, because if you look at the dark, if you look at Ulasil, what does it entail?
The dark, the deep, all of these different manifestations of the weight of sin and guilt and attention towards things that don't redeem the human spirit.
And that weigh down a soul,
Right.
literally, in the manifestation of the game, right?
Yeah, it shows you that across the Dark Souls games to point toward the unholy nature of it, to show that your responsibility is to struggle in the service of that.
Mm-hmm. And so then we ended with looking at Dark Souls as a myth, and that is really, like, that kind of touches on some of the analysis that we have, but it doesn't cover everything, for sure. I mean, we've talked a lot about Dark Souls already, and we've barely scratched the surface.
In what we've discussed today, we have barely scratched the surface. Like, I very soon would like to have some conversations about maidens and why there are maidens in the game and why the doll ties into that, right? Because that helps people understand the whole context.
Well,
for
what
the
about
conflict.
Bonfire Chan? We're going to talk about her, right?
Oh, of course.
But yeah, I mean, the maidens that have been in the game since Demon's Souls and
Right.
have been in every game, and the reason why that counterpart and that
like, why is there a necessity for blindness?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why is Gwen blind when we fight him, right?
Yeah, and why does what does that have to do with the firekeepers and
all
the
that stuff we can
maidens?
get into? I think we can continue doing these for now. It's that's going to take a little more putting together, but
Yeah,
we'll see. Maybe it'll happen before the end of the year. So, but I think this was good. Is there anything else you want to add before we depart?
No, just that we don't really want to make these videos just to try to make fun of people's interpretations of the game.
I'm not
disparage
trying to make
anybody.
fun of anybody.
I think ultimately it's that we're just dissatisfied with the content that's been coming out of the community, and it seems so strange how difficult it was for everybody to make any progress on Elden Ring
Mm-hmm.
without the perspective that they needed. And it seemed like the people who were closest got, like Ratatosker, got demoralized toward finding a through line, a symbolic thread.
Yeah.
And I just don't think it's dead. I don't think that the hope should be given up on that we'll find a good symbolic thread. I think that
It wasn't just Ratatosker. There was another one too. That was
there were several.
Yeah,
I think
they just gave up.
That's going to be probably the theme of the next one, right?
Don't give up. Guts.
Don't you dare go hollow.
But that yeah, and I think that really goes into it. The dissatisfaction with it and the slant now for everything to be a product of mistranslation is really annoying.
Yeah, like the truth is going to be evident on the face of it, right?
You also play the games that have no dialogue at all, and you can see things that people in Japan can also see. It's not that you're not.
That is that language.
Yeah, it is the mythological language that we were talking about earlier. Joseph Campbell was talking about it. You don't need it. You don't. The language barrier, as long as it's in the same spirit, doesn't matter. Which is exactly what we were saying about whether it's one pygmy or more than one pygmy. Doesn't matter.
Pygmy as an idea is pygmy.
Yes, and so that goes into it, and that's kind of what we're getting at here because the deep story has not even been uncovered.
Oh no, it hasn't even been touched.
A little bit by our last video, but
Yeah.
mostly no.
Mostly
no.
in a broad sense, yeah.
In a very broad sense. But yeah, I think we will go ahead and sign off on this one. I think we covered what we wanted to cover, and we should be uploading these hopefully once a week, but things are about to get busy, so
we'll see.
We'll see. Anyways, we hope you enjoyed the show. I'm your host on the left, Owl.
I'm your host on the right, Brock.
And have a good night, everyone.